Hi, anyone and everyone. Welcome to Have You Heard About This Case? My name is Sam.
And my name is Kelly.
Today, I'm going to bring you a case that is a little bit more well known, and it has fairly recently had an arrest. But before we dive
Ooh.
into it, Kelly, what's our question today?
So my question, I'm sitting here looking out at all the boats on Lake Michigan and I'm so jealous. And Sam, my question to you is, when's the last time you went on a boat ride? Do you like boat rides?
Oh, I
Are
love going out on
they
the boat. It's been a
when
long
you can
time,
really
though.
yeah, when you can get on the lake and you can kind of really open it up when you got flat lake. Oh.
Yeah, I grew up in an area that had a ton of lakes. Obviously not like
Mhm.
Lake Michigan, that's massive. But it
Mhm.
was it I for many years we lived well, I guess for a couple years we lived on a lake. And so every
Mhm.
day after my dad would get home from work, we'd take the boat out and go water skiing every night.
Oh my God, that sounds so fun.
So yes,
I
I've spent a lot
was,
of time on boats as a kid.
yes, I was born right near the lake as well, and I spent as much of my childhood as I could on a jet ski. I think
See,
they're
we weren't
so
jet
fun.
skiers. We never really did that too much. But
I
that
love
seems
jet
like a lot of
skiing. It's
fun.
so fun.
We would go
It's really
snowmobiling, so
fun.
we'd do like the winter version.
Ooh, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. That is the winter version.
Yeah. Oh, now I miss the lake. I wanna go out and have a good like northern Wisconsin lake day.
Yes, I love the lake days.
Yeah, it's probably been 5 years or so since I've really been out on a boat. Far too long.
Oh, I know, I know. God, it's so great. I'm just a lake person, always have been.
Yeah, I actually have a sign in my apartment that I made at one of those like uh, drink and craft party
Mm-hmm.
things. Um, that is from the lake in my hometown. So I got to like custom design it, and I have this like big plaque of like life on the lake
Mm-hmm.
in my apartment,
Aw,
and it just reminds me of being up in Wisconsin and enjoying
yes.
it.
Uh, I love it.
Well, today's case is unfortunately nowhere near as happy as that. But as I mentioned, there has fairly recently been an arrest, which
Wow.
makes me very excited because this is a case I've been closely following for a handful of years now. And
Mm-hmm.
it felt like a case that was so solvable, but seemed like just nothing was happening. And that's not due to the investigation or anything. It's just like there were no leads. So I'm very
Mm-hmm.
excited to kind of dive into this today. And we will be talking about Faith Hedgepeth. And I know you and I have talked about her case before.
Mm-hmm. A little bit.
A few years ago, when I was first starting the idea of doing a podcast, the initial idea was I was going to do it with my sister. And this was the first case I ever researched. And that was before an arrest was made. So it was really kind of interesting
Ooh,
diving back into my old research and kind of vamping it up and then now adding all this new information into it.
that's awesome.
And I also really just haven't seen a lot of podcasts covering this case since the arrest. I haven't
Mm-hmm.
gone looking too specifically, but
Mm-hmm.
I think a reason why that is because the trial hasn't happened, but I still think it's worth
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
So, to get into Faith's story, she was born on September 26th in 1992 in Warren County, North Carolina. So she's very much in our age range, just slightly younger.
She's, yes, she's younger than me by like a year.
And
Just so young.
she was unfortunately 19 when she was
Oh,
murdered. She was part of the Malawai Sapuni Native American tribe, which is recognized within the state of North Carolina. And she grew up living on a reservation. And she is the youngest of four kids. She has 2 brothers and a sister. When she was 1 year old, her parents actually divorced, and she primarily lived with her mom and her sister. And I do believe her father was still involved in her life, but he did have a drug problem, which is what ended up leading to the divorce.
Oh, okay. So perhaps he was there, but not quite lucid.
At least early on in her life, from what it sounds like. It does sound like she did have a relationship with him, and a good relationship with him. So there's a very good possibility that he was able to stop doing drugs and become more stable in his lifestyle. But honestly, I didn't really see that mentioned. But there's some notes in here that she seemed to be in good contact with her dad. And I've seen some interviews with him more recently where you could tell how much he really loved Faith, and that he was very proud of her and the things that she was able to do in her life. And she was an incredibly smart young woman. She really wanted to become a pediatrician, and she wanted to be the first in her family to graduate from college.
That's awesome.
But obviously, with Faith wanting to become a pediatrician, she would have to go to college to get her medical degree. And she enrolled at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And as I mentioned, she was incredibly smart. She was a high school honor student, and she received a Gates Millennium Scholarship for college. And this is highly competitive.
Oh, wow.
The scholarship program, it did end in 2016 from the looks of it, but on average, 50,000 students would apply each year, with only 1,000 being chosen for scholarships.
Wow.
And some of the criteria for this scholarship said that applicants should be able to provide strong examples of personal success and growth, emotional maturity, motivation, preservation, and etc., and demonstrate an outstanding leadership abilities. So obviously this is a big deal for her to win this scholarship, and I'm sure this was a big deal for her family because college isn't cheap.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, that's fantastic news. Only 1,000 out of 50,000.
Exactly. I don't know how much she received. I don't know if it was a full ride. But anything in those circumstances is a huge accomplishment.
Yes, absolutely. I would imagine with, like, those numbers, it may have been a significant amount.
That's my assumption as well. It sounded like it was millions and millions each year that was given. But it didn't show like a breakdown. It didn't specify if they were all full ride or what.
Good for her. Either
huge
way,
accomplishment.
Good. Yeah, good for her.
And Faith really wanted to take her education back to her community because she really wanted to become a pediatrician in her hometown where she could help kids that were from her native tribe.
Oh my God.
So she really just wanted to give back and do what she could to help people. In the spring of 2012, Faith decided to take a semester off from school, but she re-enrolled that next fall. And she chose to leave home again, move back to college for classes. And while she was waiting for her financial aid to kick in, I don't know if her taking time off could have potentially lost her scholarship or if it just wasn't in full. It didn't cover her full tuition. But she did have to still work with financial aid. And for those of you who have kind of been through this process, you can literally find out within the first couple days of school how the financial aid package is fully working and to get that money that you need for your classes. Right. So in this time period at the beginning of school that fall, she actually ended up moving in with one of her best friends, Karina Rosario. And this was just a temporary plan because she was waiting for this financial aid money so she could get her own apartment. So this was just going to be ideally a couple weeks, if that, and then she'd be on her way, getting her own place. And Karina's apartment was in a complex that's called Hawthorne at the View. And this complex had a ton of different buildings, but her apartment specifically was in the last building at the end of the street, which was surrounded by trees. And it only had one road in and out, since it was just the last building.
Okay.
Karina's unit was on the second floor, and it was a one-bedroom apartment. And honestly, to me, this sounds pretty nice for a college area. I've lived near college campuses after I graduated college, and I would have looked for a place just like this to have it a little quieter and a little less congested, hopefully.
A little more trees.
Mm-hmm. And I believe that this was kind of more of an exterior building. I don't think you needed a key or a scan code to get into the building. I think all of the apartments came to an exterior hallway.
Okay.
So just kind of give you a visual of what this place kind of looked like. So as long as you had a key to your unit, you could get in.
Okay, yeah.
And so this kind of just remember this. It'll be a little important later.
Mm-hmm.
So shortly before Faith moved in with Karina's ex-boyfriend, Eric Decoy Jones, lived in the apartment. Karina kicked him out because of domestic violence issues. And Faith was Karina's number one supporter in this decision to kick him out and break up with him.
Mm-hmm.
In July of 2012, so just a couple months before Faith moved in, and shortly after Eric was kicked out, Eric went to confront Karina, and during this confrontation, he actually broke down 2 different door frames in the apartment.
Oh my God.
So after this...
Door frames. Those things...
Yes.
Jesus.
I'm not sure if it's the front door, because obviously that takes more force than an interior door typically, because it's typically a sturdier door. But either way, it's aggressive, and it's awful that Karina had to deal with this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So after this incident, Faith actually took Karina to go get a protective order against Eric. And this...
She's such a good friend.
She is. She really... You can tell that Faith just really loved people, and she cared about the people in her life.
Yeah.
So this, unsurprisingly, but terribly, upset Eric.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually threatened Faith's life over the phone. So that's obviously a very, very intense reaction. Which it just sounds like this is just a terribly toxic relationship to begin with.
Right, and we know that this man already is capable of domestic violence. So now he's contacting you. Ugh.
Exactly. But it does seem like things started to cool down a little.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't found any specific dates other than this July incident. Of any sort of altercations between Eric and Karina or Eric and Faith. So I don't really know a whole lot about it. I just don't know if stuff wasn't released or if nothing happened. I'm going to make the assumption that kind of nothing big or noteworthy happened since I haven't seen anything.
Right.
So now let's jump into September 6th. Which was Faith's last day alive. So that evening, I'm going to break down the timeline as specifically as I can. And it really just seems like a very typical day of a college student. Around 5:45 p.m., Faith was pledging a sorority on campus and attended a sorority rush event for Alpha Pi Omega. And she was there for about an hour and a half, but then she left to go to the library because she had to work on a paper. and she met up with Karina. And they both arrive at the library around 8 p.m. While at the library, Faith is texting her dad. She's talking about her excitement for joining the sorority. So that's why I feel like they probably had a pretty good relationship. And then by 11:30 p.m., Faith and Karina leave the library and head back to the apartment. But they weren't quite done for the night. They're college students, after all.
Right.
And so at 12:30 a.m., Faith and Karina leave to go to the Thrill nightclub.
Okay.
The Thrill is an underage club, and it's very popular for college students in the area. And at this point, I feel like it's important to note that there's no evidence that Faith and Karina are drinking this night. They are at a club, but it is an underage club, so they're not serving alcohol. Like, it certainly is possible that they drank post-library before going to the club. It is. But
yeah,
I don't think it really matters in this case.
I was going to say, it doesn't seem to be much of, like, a mitigating factor.
It really doesn't. And
could they have had a drink? Yeah, but either way.
Yeah, and I have a strong opinion that if a victim is drinking alcohol, that doesn't mean they ever deserve to be murdered. Like, and I think you and I are on the same point, like same wavelength with this thought.
Yeah,
but
absolutely. Like, even if they both drank like a sixer before they went to the underage club, like that doesn't warrant anything happening to them.
Yeah, exactly. And as you see, as we kind of go on, we'll kind of come back to this because a lot of people do. A lot of people kind of come back to that they were probably partying and things could have happened. And so we'll touch on this a couple times, but I'll tell you right now, whether they were or weren't, I truly don't think that has any impact on this crime itself.
Yeah.
So now, about an hour after they get to the club, at 1:23 a.m., Faith's phone called a friend of hers. Her friend was asleep, so it went to voicemail. And when her friend saw this missed call in the morning, she listened to the voicemail, and she could hear music and some talking. She assumed it was a butt dial, and Faith is actually known for doing this. Apparently, amongst all of her friends, they're pretty used to getting butt dials from her. So she just deleted the message and didn't really think about it. Around 2 a.m., Karina tells Faith that she really isn't feeling great and she's starting to get a stomachache, and they decide to leave the club together. And they're seen on security footage at this point from the Thrill at 2:06 a.m. leaving.
Okay.
So this is where the timeline starts to get a little bit more vague. We do have some specifics, but there's less people to kind of tell the story at this point.
Right. Because the truth is being hidden.
Truth is being hidden, or there's not as many people around. You don't have as many different accounts of what's happening from multiple people to corroborate each other. So around 3 a.m., Faith's Facebook page was accessed. Nothing was posted, but that doesn't seem weird to me. You just kind of scroll through a little bit and turn it off. And then at 3:40 a.m., a text from Faith's phone was sent to a man named Brandon Edwards saying, "Hey, B, can you come over here, please? Rosario needs you more than you know. Please let her know you care." And this was then followed up 3 minutes later by another message to Brandon that just said then. And so it's just assumed that she's correcting her previous sentence so that it would more accurately read, "Hey, B, can you come over here, please? Rosario needs you more than you know. Please let her know you care." So Brandon is a former boyfriend of Karina, and it seems like they were really on good terms post-breakup. And so we're not entirely sure which context this really means and why Faith is texting Brandon this. But this is kind of the argument that a lot of people, again, bring up potential alcohol. Because, like, you know the trope. You get drunk, you text your ex. Like, that's what a lot of people are kind of referring to in here. But, again, I think that's purely speculative.
Okay, so they haven't been able to produce these text messages before a court or anything.
No. Well, we'll get to that. We're actually, I will tell you right now, there has been arrest. There has not been a trial.
Okay, all right. So these may be held back.
Yes. And in all honesty, I'll tell you right now, I don't think these texts are related. I think they just happened. But there are some theories with them that we will discuss a little bit later. We'll get into it. There's a lot of different theories because this is a bizarre case once you get into some of these details. But around 4:16 a.m., Brandon responds. And he actually asks who's texting him because he apparently didn't have Faith's number in his phone. And around this same time, Karina calls Brandon. And he doesn't answer. So, like, right now we're just trying to give you as much of the concrete timeline as we have because we don't have a whole lot more.
Right. Wow.
But then about 10 minutes later, so around 4:25 a.m., one of Karina's friends, Jordan McCrary, arrived at the apartment building to pick up Karina, and they left together, which left Faith alone in the apartment.
Okay.
So now let's jump to the next morning. Karina needs a ride back to her apartment, and so she calls Faith around 10:30 a.m. Faith doesn't answer the call, so she calls another friend of hers to give her a ride. And this friend that she called was Marisol Rangel, and they arrived at the apartment around 11 a.m. When they got there, they found Faith in the bedroom. And remember, this is just a one-bedroom apartment, so it's pretty small. And she was naked from the waist down, and her t-shirt was pulled over her head, covering her face.
Oh my God.
And she was lying halfway off the bed with the comforter partially wrapped around her. So obviously this has to be so traumatizing for Karina and Marisol.
Oh, absolutely. Oh God.
Yeah, I can't even imagine walking into anything like that.
No.
So they call 911, and this call has been very heavily criticized. I'm not going to play it because I've always had some weird feelings about this call and some of its criticism. But I'll talk about it a little bit and kind of what happened and why there's criticism.
Right.
And when I first started the idea of the podcast, this was one of the episodes I was wanting to cover early on. So I did a ton of research, and I originally wanted to include the audio to talk about some of this criticism, but as we've kind of done this more, I don't feel like it's necessary, especially with more information that we'll get to later. But there's a lot of skepticism when it comes to how genuine the call is. So some of this criticism is that Karina never says Faith's name on the phone. That's kind of like my reaction is like, okay.
Yeah.
Like, I don't necessarily find that to be any sort of telltale sign of anything. But interesting to note.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I will point out, the 911 operator doesn't ask her specifically for her name.
Oh, okay.
So, like, that's something to point out
Mm-hmm.
with this criticism. And another piece is that the 911 operator asked Karina to check if Faith was still alive. Because Karina was saying she didn't know. She just walked in, she saw her friend, she called 911. And the operator, she was really just doing her job, asking, like, can you tell if she's breathing? Can you tell if she has a pulse? And as Karina started to describe what was going on more, she was also saying that she doesn't want to approach Faith. She was scared that this was her friend that she's seeing in front of her. And she didn't want to touch her to check for a pulse.
Ugh.
And so that's such a difficult position to be in, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah, that's weird because it's like, of course you don't want to approach and find out this thing, like, definitively. But also, what if there had been a pulse?
Exactly. That's the criticism, is like, why would you refuse to do that? But also, remember, she's 19 years old. She's so young.
I was going to ask, like, can we get an age check again one more time? Because, yeah, this is, like, she's just in college. She's, like, away from home for the first time. And, like, this is a big one to be dealing with on your own for the first time.
And I think you and I have the ability to look at it as people who are interested in true crime. And we've obviously chosen to start a podcast and talk about it. We have a different view of how we feel like we would react in these sorts of situations. And I feel like it would be hard, but I wouldn't hesitate. I feel like if I was asked to check a pulse.
Right.
But I can understand why some people will. Especially in this sort of situation, especially at her age. But one thing I would also like to point out with this 911 call is I think this operator did a fantastic job, because she had the ability to keep Karina calm and slowly get more information out of her. So when she's asking her to check for a pulse, Karina is starting to describe a little bit more of what she's seeing to the operator. And the moment the operator feels like foul play is involved based on her description, she immediately tells her to get out of the room and to get somewhere that is away from the scene so that it isn't potentially contaminated. While keeping Karina as calm as she can be. So I think that operator deserves the acknowledgement there, because that's what we need out of a 911 operator.
Absolutely. They knew right away, like, you got to get out of there to preserve it.
And she also stayed on the phone the whole time until police or first responders arrived, which I know sometimes is a state law, and I don't specifically know if that is a North Carolina law or not. But
that is a very good question. I'm not sure either.
Yeah, I know it's state by state. But either way, I think it was like an 8-minute 911 call, I want to say, off the top of my head. And she stayed the whole time. There were a couple of moments where it was fairly quiet, where there wasn't much dialogue, but she kept a conversation going with her and waited until she could hear the first responders talking to Karina before she got off the phone.
Okay.
So I want to call it a good 911 responder. Yes.
Round of applause, 10 out of 10. Perfect 10. Stuck the landing.
So as we get into this investigation now, investigators were able to determine that Faith was murdered using an empty Bacardi bottle that was left on the floor of the bedroom. And it's believed that this bottle was already in the apartment, which would likely indicate that this was a crime of opportunity. And it was also determined that Faith was possibly raped. But I would like to point out that authorities have never officially confirmed this, but they have implied it.
Okay.
So I think that's an important note here. Just
right,
because
they haven't...
They've never actually said that this is what happened.
Right, but they've never actually said, this isn't what happened. So...
Well, the reason why they won't say this isn't what happened is because there was semen found on the bed.
Okay, so that doesn't... Yeah, you can't...
So this could have been an attack that was somehow sexually, like, involved.
Motivated.
But that's the word. This could be sexually motivated, but may not have included rape. But they couldn't tell at this point.
Right.
She also had cuts and bruises on her arms and legs and blood under her fingernails.
Oh, wow.
So to me, this seems like, just based on this pretty basic description, that Faith was likely in bed when an intruder entered her apartment and attacked her, and that she did what she could to defend herself. And again, this is exactly why I'm standing by my statement earlier that alcohol shouldn't have any blame for a victim being murdered, because in this scenario of what I personally believe happened, Faith's alcohol consumption or potential alcohol consumption has absolutely no factor in her murder.
Right, because either way, you've determined these wounds caused to her, which I can't imagine must have come from this Bacardi bottle. So I'm really not interested in what her BAC is. I more want to know what happened to this poor girl.
Exactly. And every time I see someone reference, oh, well, they were likely drinking, first off, that's strictly speculation. But it just, to me, it has absolutely no factor in this case, whether Faith was drinking or not.
Yeah.
So Karina was questioned right away. Obviously, she's the one who had found Faith, who lived with Faith, was her best friend.
Right.
And everything in her timeline very much lined up with everything I was saying before that can be proven with multiple timestamps. They met up at the library. They went back to the apartment before heading to the Thrill. They returned home after getting the stomachache around 2 a.m. and that she left at 4:25 a.m. But one thing that she said that she couldn't remember if she had done when she left at 4:25 was whether she locked the door or not when she left. It seems like in retrospect she believes that she didn't lock it. And she has received so much criticism for this. And that's just, it's very difficult to...
That's...
Like, it's awful, but it also could be 100% purely accident. Zero intention. And
Absolutely.
it's just, she's received so much criticism for this.
Absolutely. I've done it myself. Like, did I lock the front door? And it's just, I've been in many an apartment like the one you're describing where there's only one real way in and out. And you have the inner door that locks, and then you have an outer door to the street.
She doesn't even have an outer door to the street.
Oh, she doesn't.
So yeah, remember when we're talking about the apartment, all of the doors are into an exterior hallway.
Okay.
So it's still like, it's, I believe that this was likely just a true accident.
Right, they were going out for the night, she forgot.
It's the one layer of protection that is there.
Yeah.
So as other people are being interviewed and questioned and neighbors start talking, One neighbor on the first level of Karina's apartment building said that around 3 a.m. she heard 3 loud thuds. And she described this in a 2020 interview, saying they sounded like they could have been heavy book bags being dropped, or it could have been an end table being turned over.
Oh.
So, one thing I would like to point out with this is I think those two things sound very different from each other.
Yeah, you're right. You're right about that.
I've lived in an apartment for the last 10 years in multiple different apartments, and I've always had people living above me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are two very different sounds.
Yeah, if I heard like an end table fall over, I would probably be a little bit more concerned. Like there's a struggle going on, something bad is happening. But like if a neighbor dropped like a book bag with roller skates in it, I'm not gonna like go peek out into the hall.
Yeah, so like I can understand concern hearing 3 loud bangs at 3 a.m. Fully understand that concern. I just personally don't see the comparison between the two examples that they provided in their statement.
No, it's not very helpful. It's a little bit like we heard sounds. And,
exactly.
Yeah.
And this statement, in addition to the timeline of 3 a.m., would raise a lot of questions for investigators and true crime outlets. And it's because we have seen timestamps of Faith texting after 3 a.m.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that was to Brandon.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so there's a lot of people who then start speculating that maybe that wasn't Faith texting. Like, we don't really know, but this is just creating a lot of questions.
Interesting. I wonder how those texts compared to how she would usually talk to that person.
Exactly. And I haven't seen many people really analyze that part of it and whether they were able to see how she wrote to other people. But it's interesting, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So using this logic of, okay, 3 a.m., you're hearing these thuds, and this is the time of the murder. Logic says that Carino is likely at least partially responsible or involved.
That's where my logic would take me as well. I hate that, but logically I would arrive there.
Yeah, and it's just because we have the evidence that they left around 2 from the thrill. And I would like to note, it's about 10 minutes between the thrill and the apartment. It's very close to each other. And they were driving.
Okay.
And again, I think that goes to, there's a good possibility they weren't drinking if they're driving. That could be wrong. Yeah. But again, I think that just kind of goes to the likelihood that alcohol is not involved.
Absolutely.
But then if you're going with that logic as well, you have to believe that it was Karina sending those text messages to Brandon and not Faith.
Right, which is, again, why I wish there was some sort of comparison on how she usually talked in particular to Brandon and how these text messages may have differed.
Exactly. But yeah, unfortunately, we don't know that.
Yeah, but you're right, the two do go hand in hand.
So, as the investigation progresses, DNA was discovered. Not only with the semen that was left on the bed, but there was also DNA on the Bacardi bottle. And, as investigators say, elsewhere in the apartment. Now, that seems pretty vague. But while watching an investigation discovery documentary on this case, I believe that they were referring to the bathroom as elsewhere in the apartment. Because they kind of had a little segment where it looked like, in their telling of what happened during the murder was that the suspect came out and the bathroom's kind of right outside the bedroom, and that they probably went into the bathroom, potentially washed their hands, and left.
Oh, okay.
That's my assumption based on putting a few pieces together,
Right.
but it's never been clearly stated that that's what it was.
Okay. Okay. But I mean, I'm with you. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it adds up in my head. That doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it does.
Yeah.
So one of Faith's friends, the one who received the butt dial at 1:23 a.m., heard about Faith's murder shortly after the investigation started. So that morning of September 7th. And she took it upon herself to contact her cell phone service provider to retrieve that deleted voicemail.
Yes.
They were able to do that. So she was able to get that
Yes.
voicemail back.
Oh,
And-
what a good friend.
Right? Again, I think that just shows how important Faith's friends were to her and how important she was to them.
How loved she was. Yeah.
And I'm not going to play this voicemail because a majority of it is unintelligible. But we are given some new information from it, and it might be completely unrelated. And in reality, I personally think it's unrelated. But again, I think it's worth noting. So you can hear in the kind of the background, because it does sound like they are potentially in the club. And remember, this timestamp is 1:23, which would put them there.
Right. Yeah.
You can actually hear T-Pain's song Booty Work in the background.
Okay.
And you can hear some people talking. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with this name, Kelly, but Arlo West analyzed the audio. Arlo West is a well-known audio expert who has worked on cases such as JonBenet Ramsey. So
okay,
he's
called in
well-known.
They called in the big guy for this one.
Yes. So as he's analyzing the audio, he believes some of what you can hear in the dialogue is a woman crying, which he believes is Faith, and another female saying, "I think she's dead." Then there's a male saying, "Do it anyhow." And then there's some more dialogue that's incredibly difficult to determine what's really being said. But West believes he can hear the name Eric and Rosie being used. So this would be in reference, Rosie would be to Karina Rosario and her ex-boyfriend, Eric, who we previously mentioned.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So, again, very interesting. But the timeline's weird.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of controversy when it comes to using audio experts at times in this sort of situation.
Yeah. And it's just, but again, like you said, the timeline's weird.
It seems very weird.
It doesn't add up that they would already be hearing this sort of exchange between them because she hasn't even arrived home yet.
Yes. And I do have it mentioned later in my notes here, but the cell phone service provider has acknowledged there is the potential that the timeline is inaccurate. So the 1:23 timestamp could be wrong.
Okay.
So, and I think there's a handful of things for this. I think that there was a glitch at the time period, because this is 2012. Cell phones are a thing, but they're not what they are today.
Right. Okay, but that would be important to know. I noted.
Yeah, and they also said the fact that it was deleted and retrieved could have also messed with the timestamp. But it's not conclusive on whether it is accurate or inaccurate. We just don't know.
Yeah.
And so as we're obviously kind of going through this, you can understand why a lot of people are believing that Karina had something to do with Faith's murder, likely with the help of Eric. But as we keep
Well,
saying, this timeline seems off. I don't know.
yeah, I don't know either.
But like when it comes to a lot of skeptics or a lot of people looking into this case who are not experts, they're really leaning on Karina and Eric's involvement in this.
Wow.
And
'Cause
there's just too many weird things.
am I completely mistaken, or is Eric Karina's ex-boyfriend?
Ex-boyfriend who she has a protective order against.
Okay, very odd then to think that Karina would be somehow working in concert with this guy.
Well,
That
a
that
lot of people's arguments is that he is manipulative in addition to abusive, which those can be, the manipulation can be abusive. And I think that a lot of people's theories is that they're kind of going hand in hand, and he was able to work his way back into her life. And he hated Faith so much that he was trying to get Karina to turn on Faith. That's the general theory that I'm personally understanding from what I'm reading, in just like posts by people on Reddit and that sort of stuff. But it's pure speculation. Like the evidence that they're looking at to create this theory, I think mainly comes from that butt dial voicemail. So, like, just keep that in mind, that it's purely speculative.
Yeah, there's nothing that this young lady so far has said or done to make it seem like she's involved.
Yeah, it's that the 911 call was a little bit weird. It sounded like she was crying on the 911 call, but it sounded more whining. But I honestly think that is that's people are different. People react different. And I think it very likely is genuine emotion.
Yeah.
But when
you
you're
don't know
just
how to
hearing
process
the
what you're
audio, it might not come off that way. And one thing I would personally like to call out with this butt dial voicemail is I feel like there's only really two potential situations in when this call was made: at the club or in a car. And the reason I say that is because that song you clearly hear in the background. Like, it is identifiable. You can listen to it. If you're familiar with the song, you'll know that that's what it is.
Right.
And the neighbors,
Right.
like, neighbors were reporting sounds. They never reported music. So I don't think that music would have happened in the apartment. At least not to the volume that it is in the voicemail call.
Right.
So
So
the only other option in my head is that it's likely a car if it isn't the club.
yeah, I can definitely see why you would think that, because if it were so identifiable like that, because sometimes even when you're in the club, like, music that comes on, but it's so loud and the beat is bumping so hard that sometimes it's even hard to decipher what you're hearing. So it
Exactly.
kind of makes sense. It kind of makes more sense, though, isn't it? It could have been in a car.
Well, there's times that you all you really hear is like the bass, where you can't really hear the song. So it does very much sound like it could absolutely be in the club. There are some theories that maybe it was accidentally, they were in the bathroom, and so you could hear their dialogue a little bit better than you might if they were on the dance floor, but you still hear all the music. Like, there's so many different theories, and again, it's all speculative.
Yeah.
But when I was trying to like piece it together in my head, being like, okay, if this call did have an inaccurate timestamp, based on what we're hearing in this call, it doesn't seem like it would have happened in the apartment. Where else could it have happened?
Right.
But I'd also like to point out, like, we can't hear a lot of the details of this conversation. That what if they were at the club and the butt dial happened at the same general time that Faith and Karina are talking about Eric?
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're best friends, and Eric is Karina's ex. Like, it's very possible they're just chit-chatting about some stuff involving Eric. Like, I don't know. I don't think it has any relevance, but I think it's important to talk about because that's what a lot of people focus on in this case. A couple of the reasons why people think Karina potentially could be involved and why a lot of people kind of jump on this theory is that next morning, neighbors saw Karina and Marisol after they called 911, and they said that they clearly saw Marisol crying, but didn't see Karina crying. Again, I would very much like to point out people react to things very, very differently.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
I don't think that's necessarily evidence of anything, but could look very weird to an outsider.
Isolation can be a form of grief, you know?
It could be shock. Like, there's all different sorts of things that could cause Karina to not show her emotions outward.
Yeah, absolutely.
And honestly, when I was reading all of this, all I could really think of was Amanda Knox and how she responded after Meredith Kercher was murdered. And I think most of us who are listening to this have heard of that case and seen some of that. And if you haven't, I highly recommend it. There's a good documentary on Netflix about it. Her book is fantastic.
I was just going to say her book is great too.
Yeah, I definitely recommend her book. But it's just, again, people just react differently, and it's so difficult to judge on that alone for anything. But let's dive back into some more tangible evidence here. Stuff that's still very confusing and very bizarre. And one thing that they found at the crime scene was a note that was written on the outside of a takeout bag that was from a really popular restaurant that was really close to the Thrill. So it would be probably pretty close to their apartment since the Thrill and the apartment's only about 10 minutes apart.
Yeah.
And on the outside of this takeout bag, in all capital letters, it said, "I'm not stupid, bitch jealous." And we don't know really much about this. The note was left on the bed, but from the sound of it, there wasn't any blood on it, as if it potentially was put there after the fact.
Yeah.
But again, a lot of this isn't very clearly reported on as statements from the police, so we just don't know a ton of details about it. And there's so much speculation flying out with this case that I'm hesitant to add anything to it because I truly don't know.
Right.
And investigators' theories with this is that Faith, or potentially Karina, since this was her apartment, somehow insulted the murderer and called them stupid, whether that was flat out calling them stupid or implying, where somebody could think that's what they're saying about them. And this could have sent them into a violent rage. But again, this is just a theory. This is one that was put up by investigators, but it is still just a theory.
Yeah, that's really all they have to go on right now.
Exactly. And as I did mention earlier, we do have an arrest in this case, but I will tell you, there is still no explanation for this. At least not yet.
Interesting.
And one thing that I've always thought about with this, and I've had a lot of conversations with my sister about it, actually, and what if this was written before and it was, like, just kind of in the apartment?
Yeah.
And it has zero relation, and it just kind of is an odd coincidence, or was placed there randomly. Like, it's just such a weird thing to leave behind after you murder somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. But also, it begs the question then, like, how did it get there? Like, who left it there?
Exactly. Like, we just don't know anything. We know it exists.
Yeah. And it was placed in the room after the murder.
Mm-hmm. Well, potentially. Like, see, that's part of it, is they don't clarify their thoughts on whether it was or wasn't. I just saw one person note that they didn't notice blood splatter on it.
Okay.
Like, that doesn't mean that maybe it wasn't hit with blood splatter. Like, that's just the assumption that because there wasn't any on it, it could have been put there after.
Yeah.
Like, there's just so many, like, uncertainties with this case. It's so bizarre.
It's very weird.
So then in December of 2012, about 2 months after Faith's murder, the FBI joined the investigation. And according to the FBI profile, they believe, quote, the profile told Chapel Hill police that they believed that the killer knew Hedgepeth and may have lived close to Hedgepeth at the time. The FBI also believes the killer may take an unusual interest in the case and demonstrate other behavioral changes.
Okay.
Which I have to say is a very vague statement that is very common.
Yeah, it's pretty vague, a little common, but I do think that it does highlight that they're saying, like, we think this guy's gonna crack. Like, he's gonna act weird, and then all of a sudden you're gonna find some stuff in his house that he had no business having.
Yes. I agree with that it is, like, the general implication that you're gonna notice some weird things after this now. So one of the main suspects that the police were looking into, which is not surprising, is Eric Decoy Jones. And if you remember, he threatened Faith's life over the phone. So he's understandably one of the first suspects to look into. And he was initially very reluctant to give his DNA. And he did have some bizarre behavior prior to Faith's murder and after. So the evening before she was murdered, while Faith would have been at that sorority rush event around 6 p.m., he texted a friend and asked for forgiveness for what he was about to do. We don't know what he was referring to. Like, there's no context to this. But he also posted this on Facebook.
Oh my. Can you imagine getting, like, just moseying up to your phone and having a confession note on it from one of your friends, like, help the Lord forgive me. Like, oh my God, what the hell is going on?
Well, that comes later. So yeah, like, it is weird that, like, okay, ask for forgiveness for what he's about to do. But then he posts the same thing on Facebook. So he asked for forgiveness for what he's about to do. And then 3 days after she was murdered, he posts on Facebook, and he makes this, like, his banner image. So it's not even like a normal post, it's the banner image. And it says, "Dear Lord, forgive me for all of the sins and the sins I may commit today. Protect me from all the girls who don't deserve me and the ones who wish me dead today."
What?
Like, it's weird. It's also very ambiguous. Like, it's saying stuff, but it's not.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
in reality, like, this is all so circumstantial. The police can't do anything with it.
No.
It's just really weird.
Yeah, it's just not normal behavior. You're maybe starting to crack up. Maybe the FBI was right. Maybe it's you who we should probably look into it.
Yeah, the police were able to get a search warrant for his apartment and his car, and they finally got the DNA sample. And he was ruled out because his DNA did not match.
Wow. I wonder why he was so reluctant to give DNA in the first place then.
I think he probably had some other criminal things he was involved in.
Oh.
That's my personal,
You know what?
thought, but I don't know. There's no evidence of that. I haven't seen anything reported. That's just my personal assumption.
Yes, maybe just very distrustful of the police and the process, and maybe, he had been lied to before. Maybe they, were just going to take his DNA and say it was him,
Yeah.
Either way, he's ruled out.
And even if you're just thinking about it, like, he threatened Faith. So he knows he has eyes on him, but the DNA, no, I guess that's not really a good argument because the DNA would just rule him out. Like, I'm good.
Yeah.
No issue. I don't know. But investigators, they obviously weren't done. Like, they ruled him out. That's just one step. They tested Brandon's DNA, ruled him out, along with many of the friends that they saw at the Thrill that night. And so they're really basically at a dead end at this point. They don't really know what to do. And they turn to Parabon Nanolabs. And for those of you who may have never heard of Parabon Nanolabs, they often work with law enforcement to analyze DNA to determine basic genetic genealogy and create a virtual mugshot.
Whoa.
It's really cool technology. But it's also been a part of a major debate between prosecutors and defense because they're using this to create an image that isn't always accurate. And a lot of people compare it to a lie detector.
Interesting. I see why.
Yeah, so something that can be very beneficial, but I don't think it's always allowed in court. There's a lot of different things that are kind of difficult with it.
Yeah, my main hope was the whole genetic genealogy thing, like where you can narrow down, not like create a virtual mugshot. I understand why people might have problems with that. I thought they had more success with like the genetics and like found something that led to him.
Well, they do that as well. They determined that the suspect is, quote, very strongly Native American and European mixed ancestry or Latino. And they said that the most of his genetic markers were Mexican, Colombian, and Iberian ancestry. And they noted that his skin color was likely in an olivey range and that he had black hair. So they were able to get some of those more specific genetic markers. But again, it can be really hard to create a visual because people just look so different. And you could have similar ancestry and look completely different from each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
And overall, in this investigation, 2,000 people were interviewed and questioned.
Wow.
And 750 people's DNA samples were taken. And there just still were no answers. So we're going to jump ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, again, just like her community and standing behind her, like 750 different DNA samples. They were not given up.
So many.
Yeah.
I really do believe the investigators are doing everything they can in this case.
Yeah, they're
keeping a lot close to the vest. but I don't think that's
Yeah.
stopping any investigation. I think it's all happening behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
So let's jump ahead to more recent times here. We were in 2012, but on September 16th, 2021, Miguel Enrique Salguerno Alvarez, I really hope I said his name right, he was taken into custody for the murder of Faith Hedgepeth.
Oh.
This came as a major shock to me because I've been following this case for quite a few years, and there just seemed to be no movement for so long that you don't necessarily forget about it, because this is definitely a case that has stuck with me, but you just don't expect any news because you haven't heard any updates in so long.
Right. You hope that you might run across something, but you start getting used to not running across anything.
Exactly. And Miguel was 28 at the time of his arrest, which would have made him the same age as Faith at the time of the murder, 19. And so he was linked with his DNA after he was pulled over for drunk driving with an open alcohol container, using a fake license plate, and driving without having a license or insurance.
Oh.
So he was caught on a handful of different charges.
I was going to say, so basically everything illegal you can do with a car, this man was doing.
And according to an article that I read that was published in 2012 from the Office of Justice Program government website, said that 28 states at the time in 2012 made some sort of law, and there's a variation of them, where they're able to collect DNA upon arrest.
Okay.
And it seems
I think I've heard of that.
Yeah, it seems like that's what's happened in this case. I saw a few articles where investigators said that they would not say how they got his DNA, but a lot of articles kind of allude back to this law. So obviously in this case, he's pulled over for drunk driving. They were able to collect his DNA legally at this point.
Right.
And it was a month later, after this drunk driving incident, that he was arrested.
Wow.
And it sounds like, and again, the reporting on here is kind of wishy-washy. There's a lot of reports, but then there's a lot of other ones that say law enforcement refused to comment. So I'm not sure how incredibly accurate everything is. But as we mentioned earlier, there was that Bacardi rum bottle that was used as the murder weapon. And it sounds like investigators were able to determine that it was Miguel's palm print that was on the bottle.
Oh.
And according to...
That's pretty significant.
It's very significant. But it also, I have a few doubts about some of this reporting. Because according to WRAL News out of Durham, North Carolina, the fingerprints on the bottle, so not the palm print, just the fingerprints, were inconclusive.
Okay.
And the prosecutors are asking for some more time to get more detailed fingerprint scans to see if they can more clearly identify if the other fingerprints are or are not from him. So to me, that, like, I feel like if you can say, yes, there is his palm print on that bottle, in addition to linking DNA, that seems like a pretty open and shut case. Yeah. So it is very curious to me that now, 2 years after he's arrested, there's still some investigation work going on. And there could easily have been delays due to COVID. Like, I don't know how the court systems were still affected in 2021, but we're now in fall of 2023 and there's still no trial.
Wow.
So yeah, it's very interesting.
That blows my mind.
Yeah, and investigators have declined to comment on if there was any sort of connection between Miguel and Faith. And Miguel's family is being very vocal and standing behind his innocence, saying that this crime just doesn't fit his personality. But honestly, that's kind of where we're at this point. We don't have a whole lot more because the trial hasn't happened.
Right. I was just going to say, in our little wrap up here that, like, I really hope there's stuff that they're holding for this trial. That, I hope the discovery will be voluminous.
Agreed. And I definitely will be keeping a close eye on it. I would love to do an update episode at some point, because this is a case that I always felt that sort of connection to, because we were about that same age. We were slightly older than her. And just going off to college, and just I read this. I heard about this case not long after I graduated from college. And it just kind of felt like that. And we say this in a lot of our cases, but like having that sort of age connection, you can imagine yourself in similar positions as Faith.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Yeah,
and
so
she
I've
should
kept
be
such a
here,
close-
and
she should be. Yes.
She should be here, and she should be a pediatrician. She deserves that.
But yeah, do you have any thoughts on kind of some of the crazy details of this case?
I jumped the gun a little bit, and those are my main thoughts. My only other main thought is maybe when these fingerprint tests come back, if they don't test as this Miguel character, it may test for somebody who was in the house, who may have, taken a drink out of the Bacardi bottle or something like that. I hope that it's that kind of situation.
I'm curious if, like, why that handprint, if that is accurate that I'm seeing reported.
Right.
Like, could he have been working at the store and been the person to check that bottle out at the register? Like, why else would his palm print be on there? I just don't see any reports of it, and it's very curious to me that there seems to be delays in his trial when it seems like there's very damning evidence.
Yeah, you're right about that.
I don't know, and there's a lot of information that I feel like we just don't know, and
yeah, exactly.
I'm curious to know more when that time comes.
Exactly. Like I said, I hope that prosecutors have a pile to drop on this defense.
Yes.
And I'll be watching.
Yes. Hopefully it'll happen soon at this point, because it has been so long. But I haven't seen any new updated dates or anything. I'm sure they're probably out there. I might not have dug hard enough. But thank you all for listening to Have You Heard About This Case? If you liked this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And you can find us on Instagram at Have You Heard About This Case Pod, on TikTok at HYHATC, or you can email us at haveyouheardaboutThisCase@gmail.com. And we'll talk to you later.
Bye.